All right, guys. So we are back this week with a pretty fun topic. It's going to be controlling appetite on the off season, as in making sure that you can kind of keep that appetite up. So, um, one thing that I think that is important is how you distribute your macronutrients across a diet and how that it can influence hunger. So the first one that I think is protein levels that we need to kind of, discuss. We are in a higher carbohydrate type of a state. So we are having like a protein sparing effect. So maybe that total protein level doesn't need to be quite as high. In a previous Q&A, we had talked about that upper range, like in the 1.5 or a little even more, being where we commonly rate diets, but you can probably even pull it down some from there because of the net total calorie intake. Um, One thing we do know is protein does have a satiating effect. So if we're having trouble getting food down, or appetite staying high and meals down, we can not only choose protein sources that are going to digest a little faster, like your whey proteins and things like that, but also maybe the total amount we're eating across the diet.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect point because we're always like pushing protein and protein higher. It's like if we want to grow more in the off season, we'll go higher in protein. And you're right, that's not necessarily has to be the case because if you are increasing carbohydrates or fat sources that have, you know, other proteins in them, like if I eat 100 grams of carbs from jasmine rice, there's 10 grams of protein in that. Or if I'm eating 100 grams of carbs from oatmeal, well, there's a ton of protein in that. There's probably 15 grams of protein just within that.
Yeah.
Um, Now the argument's like, well, those are not complete proteins, but compare it up with enough complete protein, whether it's going to be more than adequate. So you could pull down on your complete protein sources from your meats and just do it that way. Another thing would be regarding proteins is how you're even cooking the protein, right?
Right.
Uh, Now we printed out a study. I haven't even got a chance to look at it, but it was in elderly individuals consuming minced beef or ground beef versus whole beef like steak. I think there was an increase in whole body protein accretion.
Yeah.
In other words, like you could use like a ground beef or a shredded chicken, something that's going to be easier to assimilate quicker. Not that there's like a further enhancement from it, but it's just from a digestibility standpoint. You're providing more surface area for the enzymes to work on those meats, so they won't be sitting like a big block of meat in your stomach to digest forever. So you definitely like look at shredding chicken, or you're doing like the ground beefs and stuff for protein sources, or even switching to like protein sources that have less connective tissue component, like fish. Fish can digest really easy, or even some eggs. I think those just sit lighter in general for some people.
And not only on the preparation side as far as increasing that surface area, but some things that help some of my clients and myself is like the temperature at which we cook things at, right? So as we kind of shift into talking about carbohydrates and fats, a common one that I get is people enjoying like cream of rice cold instead of having it at a hotter temperature. Maybe even avoiding like hot drinks and things along those lines, because that does have a satiating effect. Like an example that I use is like coffee, and if I ever drink decaf during prep, is always hot for me. But the moment my food starts climbing, I can't have hot anymore. So I drink like cold coffee if I need it, or my cream of rice is typically always in a cold prepared state, whether I'm using like something that's a mixable, which is a protein, or whether I'm putting it in the freezer after I make it. Um, that's that temperature at which we're eating foods can kind of influence. Now, no one wants to eat cold chicken and rice, so I'm not saying that, but maybe thinking about some of the beverages we're consuming, like staying away from carbonated drinks, that's going to have a satiating effect as well. Not that they're terrible, but like if appetite is a real issue, these are some of the little detailed things we can start to look at.
Yeah, and so speaking on cream of rice for carbohydrate content, because that's the primary thing, that's the highest volume within our diets that we're consuming. So just from a volume standpoint, looking at what we can do with carbohydrates, I think definitely picking sources that aren't going to cause you any bloating or GI distress. So pay attention to that off season. You also don't want to walk around with distended gut all off season. And I think that's can be a contributor to increasing waist size. So the carbohydrate sources, see if it digests well. Rice is the one that we're typically using. But if you get up to a high enough level where you're eating like 400 grams of rice, it's just so much that the volumes take so long to digest. It's like, what can we do to concentrate this a little bit to aid? And one thing I've moved into is like decreasing rice amounts and increasing more concentrated carb sources, like adding dried fruits to meals. It's an easy way to get carbohydrates in with a small volume. Or even I know a few guys that are really high in food is like, just sipping on some juice throughout the meal.
Yep.
Easy way to get carbohydrates in. There's actually, and I know we've got a lot of guys that do like pop tarts and more like processed carbohydrate.
Yeah.
There's actually a recent study in Hall 2019 looking at processed versus unprocessed food, and just eating freely. And people that were eating more processed food just consume more calories because there's less effect on PYY and ghrelin. Like
Yep.
it's just less satiety effect from processed foods. So not saying go eat a bunch of processed foods for health, but if there's a meal where we need to implement a little bit in, it can help you get some food volume.
Yeah, and it's not the worst thing in the world with, like you said, in small dosages, right? So like, I'll even use like post workout. Sometimes I'll use like a Pop-Tart or Rice Krispie treats or something along the cereal bar, something like that. Really dense, but not a lot of volume. One thing you can also look at is your carbohydrate to fat ratio. We know that, and we discussed this in the protein video, that higher fat contents can slow digestion down, right? So as we're pushing up, maybe our calorie increases, we change that ratio of carbohydrates to fats, because using really, really high amounts of fats could like kind of slow you down throughout the day. I mean, obviously depending on the sources that you're eating and stuff like that, but and the amounts, but that could be a consideration, right? I typically, and especially I know you do this with me, as we tend to shift a lot higher, that carbohydrate to fat ratio is a lot higher carbohydrate, a lot less fat.
Yeah, just the speed of digestion is so much faster doing lower fat approach. So I'd say, meet your fat intake that's essential, and then push the rest up with carbohydrate. Because even just anecdotally with my higher calorie days, I can be 1,500 calories higher on my like carb days. But when I go 1,500 calories less and that proportion of fat increases, I'm not hungry all day long. So I can definitely drop fats and keep a faster digestive rate, stay a little bit more hungry through the day. So I think that is a good route to go, just moving around your macronutrients to see if, what is best for you digestion wise. So you might feel better doing a lower fat diet.
So to kind of transition out of macros, another consideration may be overall activity level through the day. We're not trying to negate the effect of the increases in calories that we're doing with activity, but increasing our overall NEAT levels throughout the day, especially around the times we eat, can definitely help with motility and digestion, right? So something as simple as like tracking your steps, or maybe making some kind of solace to walk around the house and do chores for 5 minutes after you eat, or even just like a 5-minute walk with the dogs. Looking at those NEAT levels can actually help with your overall appetite, and even doing some cardio in the off season. I mean, it's going to be beneficial for health. We are trying to keep our health markers in check as we push up, but it will help that appetite some as well.
Yeah, when I worked in the hospital, we'd have patients that were post operation on like GI issues, and their GI is not back to functioning yet, or they're having gas in the abdomen. So what we would do, we just have them get up and just walk a lap around the floor, just to increase GI motility, get GI function and peristalsis occurring again, and then you start moving gas around. So it's just eat a meal and you just have to move a little bit, or just stand even can make a big difference. So if you do work like a sitting job, like for instance, I do, you could get a standing desk and just, hey, just stand for 10 minutes, work on some work, and then sit down and continue. But if you're going to eat your meal and just sit there all day and not have abdominal contractions or any movement at all, like your food's going to just sit there as well, and not move as efficiently. Some of the people I've come across that have like some of the worst GI issues ever are like truck drivers, because they eat, for one, bad food. That's just high fat, poor digestion, and then sits for so long. So just getting up and moving around a little bit, like Luke said, you don't want to like offset your calorie deficit, but just being a little bit more active can make a big difference.
And you made a great point talking about jobs. Let's talk about how lifestyle can influence this as well, like some of those outside lifestyle factors.
Yes, definitely. So high stress levels will definitely decrease appetite, right? So if you're, I think that it almost goes, it makes reminds me of like the old, like our caveman analogies. We use these all the time, right? So if
Mhm.
you're in some stressed environment and the saber-toothed tiger is chasing you, like, just surviving is essential over just eating or reproducing or whatever. So it's like run, 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 and your digestion's more based on your parasympathetic nervous system, which is more active in a relaxed state. Which sympathetic is more of your fight, flight, run from the saber-tooth tiger effect. So you definitely could have impaired digestion just from being within a stressful environment. Stress is not only just, someone yelling at you and I'm stressed. It can also be from like a high amount of training, if you're overtraining, or doing a ton of cardio, or even the other side of the equation is not recovering from stress, which would be, lack of sleep.
And so that parasympathetic nervous system, I know everybody and their brother has heard of, call it like rest and digest, right? Since we
Feed
don't
and
have,
breed.
yeah, or that, assuming we don't have saber-tooth tigers anymore. The example I would provide is with some of my clients, I have them wait on their protein shake, maybe like 10 to 15 minutes after they finish training. Tell them to listen to some calming music or just kind of separate themselves from activity, ride with the window down in the car or whatever. Because a lot of people get that bloating from like a whey protein, right? And that could be lactate based, but it also a lot of times could be upregulation of that sympathetic nervous system. And a lot of my people will notate that they feel better after drinking their shake, that they just take that 10 minutes to calm down a little bit.
Yeah, I think definitely managing stress that way. And I just will briefly mention uh, just health in general. Because monitoring your health markers, I've had people that we start seeing glucose levels increase if they've been pushing high for a long time, and losing gaining some insulin resistance. And if blood sugars are high all the time, it does decrease your absorptive capabilities and your utilization of food. So if your body realizes it's in the surplus state, it's going to decrease your ability to utilize food. So that's one thing, is just monitoring your health throughout the off season and make sure you're staying insulin sensitive, monitoring things like your A1C, blood glucose, fasting insulin levels. It'd probably be a good idea to monitor your CRP levels for just seeing if you're like in an inflammatory state. And then if you are an enhanced athlete, being smart with your choices of usage. If you're using like orals or something that drop off appetite, keep that stuff in mind, because stay healthy and make conservative choices with those. Because when your health starts diminishing, it can definitely affect appetite, your ability to take in high amounts of food. And if you can't take in high amounts of food, you're kind of defeating the purpose of being in your calorie surplus in the off season.
Yep. And that overly covers kind of like everything that's going to affect appetite. The last one I would just make a quiet mention is sleep. There's plenty of literature out there to show that like the negative blood glucose response to lack of sleep, that could also impact appetite as well. And that kind of goes with the blood glucose monitoring that John mentioned. So if sleep
Yeah.
is an issue, that could be a factor contributing to that as well. Just make sure you're keeping a close eye on your nutrition, adjust that macro distribution, take care of your appetite and your outside lifestyle, and it'll come. You'll get it moving just fine.